The next little bit of the ACE awareness session is where we think about an activity obviously at the bottom of that mountain, and think about a mountain sort of close by to where you live or somewhere that you maybe walk, and there's somebody at the top of that particular mountain. You look up at them and it's somebody that's familiar to you, somebody that you know, somebody that you trust maybe, and they're at the top of the mountain, and suddenly that person starts to throw a few stones down at you at the bottom of the mountain. So if you can just shut your eyes for 1 minute, just imagine somebody that you really do trust and somebody that you cares for you, but they're at the top of the mountain, they can see you at the bottom, and they start to sort of hurl some stones down the mountain towards you. And then they start to throw some more, and you sort of crouch down to try and get out of the way, and quite confused by why somebody that's doing this to you, and it carries on, and obviously how upset it starts to make you feel that somebody's doing this and you can't really get out of the way. So if you open your eyes just for a minute and think about, obviously, what I'm trying to put you into the place of is how it feels for some of our young children when the person that's meant to be caring for them is actually the ones that sometimes is causing them maybe the most harm. And that's a sort of a small trauma exercise that we do just to get you to start to think about when the person, the adult trusted relationship is not there. We know that behaviour is communication in our young people that we deal with. Children that experience trauma find it really hard to communicate emotions. There are lots and lots of triggers. We can sometimes never even know what the triggers are. It can be as simple as smelling somebody's perfume, of somebody that maybe has caused problems to them in the past, a female who's been particularly sort of abusive or maybe mean. It can be a whiff of alcohol that they recognise and associate with somebody that's caused them danger in the past. So there are lots of triggers, and what we have to think about with the young people in our day-to-day job is, what is life like for that particular child? And we start to think about the patterns of speech that is useful to use with our children. And the old style version, which we're hoping to get away from when we start to make schools more aware of the ACEs in children's lives and the effect of trauma, is instead of asking children, well, what's wrong with you? What's going on today now? What's wrong with you? What are you doing this for? And start to think about, well, what's happened to you? Because obviously, in order for your body to be fight, flighting and freezing, something is happening to you to make your body protect yourself on a constant daily basis, which is incredibly stressful. And there's a little picture there of one of our young children who can feel very stressful. So when we work with trauma, we use the word trauma. In America, they tend to use the word trauma. We are sticking with adverse childhood experiences, but obviously we are looking at trauma-informed practice and being trauma-aware as well as ACE-aware. The two are exactly the same. We get shaken up when we experience trauma, and obviously how do we relieve the pressure safely? So in our young children that are presenting us on a daily basis, obviously that have experienced trauma at home that night, could be the night before, or on a daily basis, that's carrying on over long periods of time, obviously make the trigger that causes them to straight away explode and go into that fight or the flight type response that they automatically get into to keep themselves safe. So we look at the Coca-Cola bottle, and I'm sure all of you that are to do with behaviour or anything to do with that would realise if you shake up your bottle of Coca-Cola and literally, or drop it on the floor, and then you just take the lid straight off, what happens to the Coca-Cola bottle? Psh, straight out. And what we're saying is, if you think about your Coca-Cola bottle and it's been dropped on the floor, shaken, what we have to do in order that it doesn't spill out over the top is slowly release the cap very, very in short little spots so that you don't end up making the fight and the flight basically explosion happen. So it's about releasing the tension in a gradual response way instead of obviously causing the child to go back into that mechanism of basically keeping themselves safe. If we look at the brain, it's in 3 parts. You've got the reptilian part, which is the survival part. Children in toxic stress, we now know, constantly fight, flight, or freeze. The brain is fixed in that bottom part. If you think of the brain as being like this, like a fist, this bottom bit here obviously is the reptilian part, or the part that we think about, and that's the part that basically that causes us to keep ourselves safe. And in the children that are in the toxic stress environment, that bit is overdeveloped because they're constantly having to watch what's round every corner and see what's coming next. They're hypervigilant usually, which we'll come to in a few more slides. The next stage of the brain then is the mammalian stage, which is where the children's feelings come into it. And obviously the top part of the brain up here is the thinking part. And what we often find with our children is they go straight into flipping their lid. Okay, they go from this bit starts to control what's happening, which is the reptilian part, and that means they have flipped their lids. When they flip their lids, which is the thinking part at the top, there is no point trying to have a conversation with them then. All the thinking part of the top part of the brain is then basically, they're unable to access it anyway. So often in schools, we try to have conversations with children about, why did you do it? They stand there going, I don't know why I did it. Got no reason, I don't know why I did. They cannot think why they did it. It's a stupid question, you're wasting your time. I tried it over many, many years in the nurtured class setting. Why did you do that? Why did you punch Johnny or whack him round the head? And they just look at you. There is no point. That thinking part of the brain, when they do this and they are flipping their lid and the fight, flighting and freezing comes in, the thinking part of the brain is not operating anyway. So obviously those conversations, which we do have to have with our children to try to repair some of the damage, has to be done when they come back to a certain state of calm.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child, and that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
So what I'm going to do now is difficult because you're in sort of not in tables, is we start to look at a case study of a lady called Sian, which is my name as well, and obviously she's got a young child called Matt. And what I want us to do is, if you can sort of, I don't know, if maybe you can maybe get into sort of smallish groups, or you can, I only did sort of I think I did maybe 20 copies of this because I wasn't sure how we were at the seating area, and just have a little read through it. And what I want you to think about when you're reading through it, so I'll give you sort of maybe 5 minutes or so just doing this. I want you to identify the ACEs. You now know the 9 ACEs. Right, I'm going to make you work now this morning. Give me the 3 ACEs that are obviously child maltreatment. Sexual abuse? Physical abuse? Verbal abuse. Fantastic, well done. You're great students. You've listened really well. Right, give me the next 6 on the bottom. Give me the environmental factors. Drugs, alcohol, domestic violence, incarceration, alcohol, yeah. Separation, parental, bereavement. We got them all? Excellent. 10 out of 10. Your thinking part of the brain's working really well. I'm really impressed. So what I want you to do, think about identify the ACEs in Sian and Matt's life and how this has affected on and impacted on the little boy Matt. I want you to think about what school staff will have contact with Matt and how they can support him. He's in a primary school, okay? This is actually a case study of real people, okay? They're not made up. They come from either Barnardo's or the NSPCC, and they are actual people that have been in the system, okay? So it is something that is not being engineered today. What would Matt need in an educational setting to reduce his triggers or further trauma? What behaviour is Matt likely to display in school? And would this potentially change as he starts to go from the primary setting into the comprehensive setting? And how has Sian, who's the mum's trauma, affected her ability to be that protective, supportive adult for Matt and to support his education, and what strategies can be used to overcome this? No pressure there, folks. Easy job for you this morning. Obviously, it starts off at Sian's life when she's 3 years of age, because it takes you through a complete cycle of what is happening in her life. So it starts off with, she's 3. She lives with her mum, Jo, and dad, Matthew. Jo is often angry, sad, and withdrawn. That's mum. Jo has had help from the GP and prescribed medication for depression, and this affects, obviously, how she cares for her daughter, Sian. Jo doesn't like how the medication makes her feel, so she often forgets to take it, which is a real problem that we find with mental health patients, because they do tend to feel they get a lot better for certain periods when they're on their medication, so they decide to take themselves back off it. And so we have this cycle that carries on. Sian loves spending time with her dad, and he is her go-to person for care, fun and learning. You've got that protective factor in there. She's going to get some resilience in her life because she's got dad who's there for her at that point in her life, who's her go-to person, which is obviously what we're trying to promote within, obviously, our school structures, is having somebody as a go-to person. Jo and Matthew have another baby boy then when Sian is 3.5 years old. The relationship invariably breaks down. Matthew and Jo are often arguing and fighting. Matthew's alcohol use increases and he spends more time out of the family and basically home, and they separate, and Jo struggles then to be left to parent and care for 2 children. So at this point in Sian's life, what ACEs has she experienced? Separation. Alcohol. Doesn't say anything about this. Says there's some domestic violence going on at low level, argues and fighting, yeah, and there's the mental health of the mum, yeah. So we've got quite a few going on there, but we've got that protective factor of dad, but he's now obviously off the scene. So then we move on in Sian's life a little bit later. She's now 7 years old. Big changes are happening for Sian. She lives with her mum, Jo, and mum's got a new partner, John. They've left Wales, where her family live, to go and live with John. She's got a new partner, they've uprooted, which is what we invariably find families come in, sort of tend to move around and be quite sort of nomadic in the way that they sort of, they don't tend to be rooted in one area. Sian attends school regularly. She's got good routines at home. She has difficulty maintaining friends as she's been moving such a lot. This is what we find with our children that move a lot. They struggle to fit into a social group. Jo is still struggling to manage depression, so Mum is still struggling and has nobody to turn to as they keep moving frequently. So she doesn't feel part of the community in which she's in. She doesn't really have anyone to turn to, which resilience building in our young peoples is a positive, good relationship with an adult, and it's also feeling part of the community in which you live in. So we start to see the building blocks of resilience of what makes us overcome adversity coming into these patterns as well. Jo and John now separate, so there's the next breakdown when Sian is 10 years old and they return back to Wales. So again, another huge change for Sian again. Again, no surprise, she struggles to settle in school and her attendance is now starting to be affected because she feels an outsider in the school system that she's now gone back into. Sian and her mother start to argue. Jo's in a new relationship, Simon, and he moves in with them. There are daily arguments. Sian is angry to her own mother. Simon is violent towards Jo, and Sian often tries to step in to stop this. The police are frequently called to the home. Simon resents Sian, and she spends time in the garden shed. Sian starts to hate going home. No surprise there. She spends more time out of the home with her friends. There's nobody in the house to protect me. I'll get myself some friends. At the age of 13, Sian runs away from home. Nobody came after her. She spent time sofa surfing, which is what we see is a huge problem with homelessness in our areas at the moment. We see young people that are sleeping outside. You've got to ask yourself, we've got to start to reflecting on why is there an increase in homelessness when we go to Cardiff city centre. You start looking at these patterns, you start looking at ACEs. Every one of those homeless people that's on the streets there, I can tell you now, has got 4 or more ACEs. They don't end up on the streets otherwise. So we've got to start to reflect about our part that we play in society and about the type of people that we are. Sian hates going home. She's sofa surfing, she's sleeping in doorways with her friends before eventually returns home for short periods. By the age of 16, Sian has been placed in bed and breakfast housing. It's got some huge problems going on there, huge, big changes going on. Then we move on in her life, obviously. She's in bed and breakfast. She's 17 years old now. She's left school by the age of 14. But she has managed to gain qualifications in mechanics, bricklaying, health and safety in an alternative education setting. So she's already come out of the mainstream setting. She's probably been in some type of PRU unit or behavioural unit because of her, obviously running away and different problems there. Sian now lives in supported housing accommodation for young people and has a large group of friends that she spends time with. Many of the friends have been in trouble with the police for stealing cars and possession of drugs. Sian doesn't see her mother, Jo, as they used to fight, and Sian still does not like Jo's partner, Simon. So again, there's the breakdown of the family there. Sian now has been prescribed antidepressants by the GP, no surprise there. But she doesn't always take them as she doesn't like how they make her feel. Sian smokes cannabis as she feels this helps her relax and cope. You look at the statistics there earlier from ACEs about the increased use of cannabis. She starts to do that to help her relax and cope. When she's with her friends, she feels like she can belong. She's got that community that she's desperate for, and she can have fun. Sian's in a relationship with a 30-year-old man now, Tom, and they move in together. Sian feels cared for as he buys her things she needs and he goes everywhere with her. Sian has a baby boy, Matt, when she's 18 years old. Obviously, you've got the teenage pregnancy increase, which is part of the ACE study as well. Sian's depression gets worse. An 18-year-old with a young baby without any family support, you can imagine that very soon that baby being up through the night crying and stressful is obviously having an impact on the relationship. And obviously, they start to fight. Sian wants the relationship to work. She's desperate to be part of a proper family, which is what we find with our teenage pregnancies, is they are desperate to have somebody to care for because nobody's cared for them. You can see how the cycle carries on. I want somebody to love, and really they just want to be loved themselves, but they then replace that by loving a baby at a very young age when they haven't got the emotional capabilities to do that. So Sian wants their relationship to work. She's desperate for a proper family. Money becomes a problem. Tom starts selling things from the home and running up debts. Tom's spending more time away from home, and Sian finds out now that he's now using heroin. Sian loves Matt and doesn't want him to go through the same things that she did as a child, so she tries to split up from Tom. You can see she's already recognising this is a toxic relationship. I've been through this myself. She's got enough about it to start to realise I've got a young son myself here. I need to make some changes. Tom is eventually arrested and remanded in prison on drug-related charges. So we've now got her child now, Matt. He's 3 years old. He lives with his mother, Sian. He hasn't seen his father, Tom, since he was 2-year-old. Matt and Sian were at home when Tom was arrested on drug-related charges. Tom is now in prison. Sian spends more time. She goes back to her mother, Jo, the one that she's always fallen out with, as they invariably do, for some type of support when everything has crumbled around her. Jo's mental health is still a concern. Sian tries to help her mother keep the home clean and shop for food. Social services are now concerned that Sian is leaving Jo to look after Matt on her own. She's now becoming the carer for her mother, because her mother's mental health. When Sian returns home, she usually has friends to stay. This happens more often, and there are now concerns about how she's caring for her own child, Matt. During one party, Sian is arrested for possession of amphetamine. Matt is in bed at the time, and Sian rings her auntie to come and stay at hers to look after the boy. Sian is offered a diversionary intervention instead of prosecution. Sian suffers with anxiety and depression. She finds it difficult to leave home on her own. The health visitor is where this impacts on Matt's opportunities to mix with other children. Matt is quiet when he's around new people, very clingy with his mum. When Sian is having a good day, she does like to take Matt to the park and go on some dog walks. Matt enjoys spending time with his mum. What's the protective factors in that sort of overview there, the evidence that we see about this particular family? Are there any protective factors there?
At some points I feel there were, but obviously it wasn't that continual.
It wasn't consistent, was it? It wasn't maintained and it wasn't consistent. There were different people coming in and out at different points, wasn't there? So if we go back to obviously thinking about Matt, who's going to be going into our school structure very soon. He's 3 years of age. He's already very clingy to his mum. No surprise there, because obviously that secure attachment probably hasn't been there with everything else that she's going on in her life. Then obviously we're going to have major problems, I would say, starting in the school structure already, even when he hits reception and nursery class. So we start to see some difficulties. Do you think from that there are going to be triggers with toxic stress in Matt's life? Do you think in school we're going to start to see some signs somewhere along the way of fight, flight and freeze? Pretty much he's been through a lot for a little boy, isn't he? He's been through an incredible lot already. What behaviour do you think Matt is likely to display in school as things go along? Is he going to be ready to learn? Is he in a place where he is ready to learn? Is he going to come into school feeling scared that what is happening to mum when he's in school? Because that's what we have happen. Is
worried, like, is when he goes home, is mum going to be there?
he doesn't even know if mum is going to be there. So there's no security, there's no sense of structure there of obviously, she certainly loves him. There's no doubt about that. She's desperate to give him the best chances. She's made some choices along the way to give some different options. She's tried to leave the violent partner, the one who's obviously impacting on. So she's made some life changes, but obviously she hasn't got that support network around her to actually sustain that. So how has Sian's trauma affected her ability to support Matt in his education? And what strategies do you think can be used to overcome this? Do you think anybody's ever asked Sian when she's gone back to the GP? Do you think anyone's asked Sian about why she's on medication, why she's had a baby at 18? Probably not, which is why GPs are going to be having training on trauma as well. Okay, because when you've got a 5-minute slot to see a patient with a health condition, lots of health conditions are actually underlying toxic stress, which is what the health professionals are starting to find out. So obviously these were the aces in Sian's life. You can see here. See if you give yourself a tick, 10 out of 10. You can see she's experienced physical abuse. She's got mental health problems. There is a sexual abuse element, which we're not sure of in this particular, but there was something going on with one of the male partners there, okay? Drug use, domestic violence, verbal abuse, alcohol abuse, and parental separation. She's got a whole host of them going on there. You look at Matt's life. He's got this going on. This is what he's seeing in his little life already at the age of 3. Parental separation, no contact with his father already. Domestic violence, which he will have witnessed. There's constant drug use going on. The father was on heroin. Incarceration. Father's ended up in prison even before he was 2 years of age. And he's got serious mental health with both his mother and his grandmother. What we see in a school structure is obviously, we look at the top of the iceberg. That's what we see. We see sometimes they're hitting their peers. We see young children lashing out in school. We see teenagers not completing their homework. No surprise when that's going on in your environment, that you're meant to sit at your desk in the night and get on with your homework. We're seeing some of our young teenagers loss of appetite, or we can also have the opposite, which is overeating as a comforter, because they need something in their lives to focus on. And food, very often, with children from neglectful backgrounds, food is an obsession. Either too much food or too little food. There's the control of food. If you've got no control in your life whatsoever, there's one thing that you can control: your food, what you eat and when you eat it and how much you eat. So it can be with teenage girls where they stop eating and they control their lives with the way that they eat, and they try to obviously limit what they eat to get a better body and so on, that they think is going to make themselves feel better. It's usually a sign of really low self-esteem. But we also have overeating in our children as well. We've got huge problems of obesity, obviously, in Wales at the moment. Young children in primary schools that are hugely obese already. And there's a signal behind that, what's going on. We see them tired and exhausted in school. If you've got the police coming to raid your property at midnight, which invariably happens, you're not going to be fresh-faced the next morning for school. We see shouting and swearing and aggression at others. We see the withdrawn children that we spoke about this morning that just opt out of the system altogether. The system's not there for me. It doesn't support me. There's no point being here anyway. We see the anxious, worried children. Gosh, how many of those are we seeing in schools? They spend their lives being anxious, and then we put extra pressure on them about exams, and you've got to do this and you've got to do that. The hypervigilant children, that's the children that are constantly looking from side to side to see what's coming round the back door, because you need to be hypervigilant to keep yourself safe if you're in an environment which isn't safe. We see the difficulty making and bonding with our friends. But look what's going on underneath the iceberg. If you look at Sian and Matt's life, you look at what's gone on underneath the iceberg, and we need to be starting to see that what we are seeing, the behaviours on the top of the iceberg, and we need to be asking what has happened to you, because what we are seeing is the communication behaviours of what is going on. So we could have children which are experiencing verbal abuse, parents constantly putting them down, making them feel useless, or you're a waste of space. You hear that quite often. Or you're just like your father. We have lots of that goes on. Just constant put-downs to a child, which really affects them as time goes on. Domestic violence is a huge issue, certainly in particularly Bridgend and the Valleys areas. There are more call-outs and public protection notices for domestic violence. They are really massively on the increase that our young people are facing all the time. Parents' offending behaviours, parental separation, mothers' mental health difficulties, neglect and physical abuse. All that's going on underneath the surface, and what we are just seeing is what's going on the top of the iceberg. So this is the effect of trauma. So in a child with trauma, this is the actual effects. If they're living in a toxic stress environment and they experience trauma, this is what we see. These are the signs to look out for in your classrooms on a daily basis. Very anxious children, always prepared to fight or flee. Very impulsive behaviour without a regard for the consequences. They do things because the thinking part of the brain isn't working. Disengaged, completely opting out, like we said earlier. Hypervigilant, edgy, hot-tempered, poor learners, and great difficulty building relationships. Okay, how many children is this registering a bell for at the moment? Should be a lot, I would presume, yeah? Straight away you're putting faces and names are cropping up and you're thinking, wait a minute, you, what's going on here? What's been going on? What's underneath the iceberg here? Okay. This is the intergenerational picture, which is really sad that we use in, obviously, NSPCC and Barnardo's use this, and the police. This is basically the intergenerational cycle that we tend to find happens. The little boy in the chair, okay, where dad is obviously attacking him, then becomes the sullen teenager, and then becomes the edgy, hot-tempered adult, who then becomes the adult that carries on that cycle. That's probably, I've hit you on a real negative today, but obviously the hope is that there are things that can heal. And obviously we know that there are some things that we can do, and as a supportive, caring adult in a child's life, which we all are, okay, because we're all a caring, supportive adult, you could be the most important factor in helping them overcome the effects of childhood trauma. So it's like what I said this morning about that adult relationship is actually vital to children developing resilience to overcome adversity. So obviously what we look at is we need to try to celebrate and use put-ups instead of putting down children. Okay, so we need to try to be their, the backup for them, basically. We need to stay calm and patient. The days of ranting and raving in schools can trigger really traumatized events in your child's life. And we all sometimes at times raise our voices, and we all get frustrated in a school structure. We all do that. But what we need to think about, if that child is experiencing screaming and shouting, and an adult that's very aggressive and at home with them, and we come in and we rant and rave as well, that takes them straight back to that re-triggering that. So the biggest, obviously, message that we have to do is, as difficult it is, and I'm not preaching, I'm a teacher myself, been teaching for 23 years, is to try and stay calm and patient. You get far more out of the children when you're calmer and patient than you are when you try to obviously raise your voice, because for these children, that's what they're used to. It takes them straight back to what's comfortable. Dad always screams at me in the house anyway, so it just does this to them. It makes no difference anyway, because it just confirms to them what they're used to. Collaborate, ask for their opinions, obviously, which I know that you would do in a school system, but involve them as much as they can so that they feel they got some direction that they are leading in their own lives. Inspire and expose them to new ideas, and listen and show an interest in their passions. The other building block for resilience is obviously we've got a caring, supportive adult, we've got the feeling of connection with the community, and obviously the other one that's come out in the new study is that sport plays a huge part in, if you can get a child who's got a passion in a sport, a rugby or a football, have we got a PE teacher here? You just could be that supportive role model in many children's lives. And sport plays a huge part, and being part, it makes them feel part of a team, and it helps them to feel inclusive. So sport plays a huge part in developing resilience in adversity as well, which we need to remember, because in schools we've got that perfect platform to try and find out what their interests are. Is it art? Is it cookery? Is it playing an instrument? Is it they're a good gymnast? Just try and find what that passion is so that you can inspire that child to make some different choices and some different options.
The emotional effects of childhood trauma are well known, but new scientific research suggests that the more a child witnesses violence, the more neural connections are created in regions of the brain that involve fear, anxiety, and impulsiveness. The good news is the young brain is malleable, and fostering stable, supportive relationships can prevent or help reverse this damage. Learn how your everyday gestures can help a child in your life at changingmindsnow.org.
ACEs can last a lifetime, but they don't have to, which is a positive end to today's sort of session. Healing can occur, we can repair some of those pathways, and we now know that obviously the cycle can only be broken when they start to feel that they have a safe, stable, nurturing relationships, and other protective factors heal, such as I said about the sporting links, the links with the community. So there are ways that obviously that we can do things in school to improve. So what happens next? We can build on existing skills and school interventions that are already in place. I know in your school, you've got some really good stuff going on already for well-being. So obviously part of this process is looking about, we can always become a little bit better at what we're doing, and obviously improve things and try and get more people on board with the right messages. Obviously, there's probably likely to be either twilight sessions, which will follow, or insets, where we look at working with trauma and developing resilience in our young people. And obviously, just to let you know, there's been the PCSOs in Bridgend in this 2-year project have been linked with the ACE Early Action, something called Operation Encompass. And what's been really useful in the 3 piloted Bridgend primary schools is that when the police get public protection notices in, so where obviously there have been children present in the property where they've had to go in, and either there's been domestic violence or drugs at the property, or sort of obviously alcohol or sort of aggressive incidents that have taken place, that those public protection notices have been screened for the ones with children, and it's been really useful. The PCSOs have been trying to get to the schools early in the morning to tell the staff that so-and-so has had a really traumatic night, so that when we get them into school in the morning and say, hang your coat up, let's get in, let's get ready for work, that they might need a safe area to go to with somebody that's just going to let them have some space, because they're in no way ready to use the thinking part of the brain anyway. So what is the point of putting them in a classroom with 30 other children when they've just experienced that the night before and expect them to learn? So that's been a really useful part of what we've been doing in the primary schools. And obviously the police are closely involved in what's happening in this rollout over the next few years. The Police Transformational Fund has had 6.8 million just given to them. And they are employing 11 or 12 ACE coordinators that are going to be working, and they want to link closely in with schools because they feel that there needs to be much better communication for us to realise what our young people are experiencing, and they also have got to play their part in that as well.
I'm going to end up in prison too, just because my dad's there. You're wrong if you think there are other possibilities for me. I know a criminal breeds a criminal. It's not true. There's good in everyone. My dad's a bad person. Don't think that it could be different for me. That's where I'm going. Doing well at school, finding a good job, that's not important to me. Being in a gang, getting into fights is what matters. Listening to me, you should just write me off. And don't ever believe I want to succeed. I've dropped out. I'm out of reach. Don't assume that I can become anything. You see, the script of my life has already been written. Don't dare to say there's still hope for me. If things were done differently, there could be potential. It's over. Unless you reverse your thinking, totally turn around how you see me, and don't believe it's over. There could be potential if things were done differently. There's still hope for me. Don't dare to say the script of my life has already been written. You see, I can become anything. Don't assume that I've dropped out. I'm out of reach. I want to succeed. And don't ever believe you should just write me off. Listening to me is what matters. Getting into fights, being in a gang, that's not important to me. Finding a good job, doing well at school, that's where I'm going. It could be different for me. Don't think that my dad's a bad person. There's good in everyone. It's not true a criminal breeds a criminal. I know there are other possibilities for me. You're wrong if you think, just because my dad's there, I'm going to end up in prison too.
I think the message behind that is we tend to make real quick judgments in our schools every day about where our young people are going to end up. And what we're saying is we can't take the adversity away, but what we can do is give them some resilience factors and some protective factors to try and give them different options and to try and obviously make them a stronger person in time to deal with what life has thrown at them. We all get humps in our lives. We all get periods of low and obviously high periods. And what this is saying is that we make very quick judgments in schools about he's not like his brother or he's just like his sister, and we often do this, and we tend to get into this cycle of almost writing them off, I would say, in lots of cases. They've gone so far. And I think we do need to change around our thinking and think about what's happened to our young people, and sometimes just getting to school in the day is a miracle for some of our people, just even getting here and turning up. It always upsets me because I think, sometimes, how would I turn up to school if I had had some of the experiences like we read today in Sian and Matt's life? If I was Sian, and I am Sian, but if I had experienced what Sian's experienced, would I be feeling in a really good place in school to want to learn? And would I be in a place feeling safe and secure? The answer is probably not. And obviously, what we need to do is try and instill some hope in our young people that there are other options out there, and obviously that there are people there to help them, and obviously just be that caring adult if that's something that they need at that point of their lives. So obviously, that is just the brief overview, which I'm sure you'll be able to present back to, and hopefully it'll all work for you with the links and everything, to the people that you are working with, to obviously end on a positive note, and maybe just giving the message that we really need to be less judgmental, I think, about sort of the paths that we all take in life. There are different options and it's not hopeless. Okay, thank you. That's it.